Hey guys, I thought I would start out this first experiment of Mastery Mondays. It's like a manual to life in a certain way, especially for us as entrepreneurs, just to remember the process of learning and mastery and evolution. So I'm just going to share 5 of some really good quotes that I think from this book and talk about them a little bit, and hopefully you find some value out of it. So here goes. The first one: let us call this sensation mastery, the feeling that we have a greater command of reality, other people, and ourselves. And I guess that's a good succinct definition of what mastery is and means. And it reminds me of something that one of my favorite mentors, Tom Bilyeu, says often, which is that the point of learning skills is so that you can imagine a different world in your mind and then go and make that different world happen in a way. He says it differently, but essentially he's saying that the reason that's the most important skill to have is to learn skills, is because skills allow you to look at the world and say, there's something that I wish existed or that I wish was better, and a skill is a way to do that. And so I think that's what Robert Greene is saying here. The sensation of mastery is having greater command of reality, other people, and ourselves. So that means being able to trust that we can affect our world and we can control ourselves. So the next quote: the great danger is that we give in to feelings of boredom, impatience, fear, and confusion. We stop observing and learning. The process comes to a halt. This is another thing that I hear a lot from people who are much more successful than me that I look up to, Tom Bilyeu and Alex Hormozi, to name a couple that I'm thinking of lately. And what they say is that what Tom says is that the thing that kills most entrepreneurs is boredom. And I, in the last couple of years, got diagnosed with ADHD, and it unlocked a layer of understanding for me for my whole life, my career, of this always needing to jump to the new thing. And it's very common in our world, in digital marketing, entrepreneurship, affiliate marketing, if you're in that world as well, to always be looking for the new thing. But I think something different about what most people say. There's a lot of business teachers and stuff that just basically say that you need to be more disciplined and you're getting distracted by the shiny object syndrome. Once I learned about ADHD, I really came to dislike that term, because I feel like it gets used as a way to make ourselves feel bad, instead of embracing the fact that we are people who like to, we have imaginations, we have vision, we have creativity, and we like novelty. For me, the ADHD part really magnifies that whole thing. However, so understanding ADHD, understanding our proclivities as entrepreneurs and such, it still doesn't mean that this isn't true. That if we keep jumping from path to path, it can feel fun or exciting in the moment, but the real returns in life happen when you stick with something. And this has been a really hard lesson for me to learn, but especially with ADHD, it is hard to stick with something. But if you do, you get the compounding results of sticking with something. So in this case, we're talking about mastery. I was always seduced by the idea that you could master something very quickly, and I actually believe that to be true. If you follow certain rules and guidelines, then I think you can master things very quickly, at least better than 80% of the people in the world. Now, it's that last 20% that gets tricky. We can talk about that more later. But I've never felt this to be true, that I stopped observing and learning. I can't really turn it off, whether that's just my curiosity as a person or ADHD or some combination of them. I'm not really in fear of ever stopping observing and learning. Perhaps this is a concern for other people. But I think the point here is that you get compounding results when you stick with something. And this is a big change. Again, learning about ADHD, I was able to suddenly pull out some pieces of my personality that actually are part of the ADHD. And so I can better regulate when impulses are coming from the ADHD type things instead of from a better place. All of that is to say that All of these things are obstacles to our continued journey of mastery, and just be aware of them, look out for them. For some people, fear is the thing that really holds them back, and all of these things are obstacles that every human experiences. So don't be too hard on yourself. Don't be too mean to yourself. Don't think that it's a character flaw that you find it fearful to do things that are scary. That's normal. Everybody is afraid of things they're afraid of, and that's totally normal. But that doesn't excuse you from, if you want to get the results of something and there's something that you're afraid of in the way, it's still your responsibility to explore that and do whatever it takes to meet that fear or to change your desire, whichever. For example, maybe the thing that you're being called to do is to learn a skill, or maybe it's to begin therapy and start working on wounds and trauma from earlier in your life so that you can feel capable of handling something that you're afraid of. Or if confusion is the thing that you feel like is getting in your way, then you probably have to go learn something. And maybe the way that you've been trying to learn through books or courses or something isn't actually the thing that's going to help you get there. Maybe in this particular case, you need to seek a mentor. Maybe you need to sign up for a coaching program. Maybe you need to go to school and get a degree. Maybe you need to go to the mountains of Tibet and study from a monk. None of us can know what your personal journey is, but just look out for these things on the path to mastery. The next quote: at a certain point, we move from student to practitioner. We try out our own ideas, gaining valuable feedback in the process. We use our expanding knowledge in ways that are increasingly creative. Instead of just learning how others do things, we bring our own style and individuality into play. I feel like I've been through this process multiple times in different areas of life, and that's just the natural process. But it's good to have it all spelled out here so we can reflect on it and think about it and how it's going for us. I think that it's important to remember that this process happens every time you learn something new. And it's not weird to be bad at something in the beginning. In fact, it's totally normal. And it's also a good idea to take your own opinions and thoughts out of it as much as possible and listen to the credible instructors or mentors that you have in that realm. Just do what they do and what they say to do first. And then later, once you get that going, then you can start to add your own creative impulses to it, your own creative methods. You can start to innovate. I had a mentor a while ago who used the Matrix as an analogy, and there's some line in there about how first you have to learn the rules of the Matrix and then you can bend the rules of the Matrix. And that's a simple framework that's worked really well throughout my life. Although I will say I forget it often because I do get frustrated when I'm not good at something right away. But if you remember that this process is eternal and it's the same for everybody, this process of mastery, then you can just remember that, oh yeah, this is the phase where everything feels really hard and confusing and challenging, and I don't see any way that I'm ever going to get better at this thing. That's just the first phase. And then if you stick with it, again, going back to the previous quote, if you get around the fears, the confusion, and the other things, and you stick with it, just stay there, just hang in there, keep going with this thing, then eventually you won't feel so awkward. You'll be able to stand on your own 2 feet. You'll be able to do the basics over and over, which is where it all starts. And then from there, you can start to innovate eventually over time. This is a mistake I've made many times in my life and probably will continue to make, but I like to be reminded that you have to have a bit of patience and you have to suck in the beginning, and then eventually you can get better and start to innovate. I know a lot of people, if you're watching this, you're probably very creative. You like to have lots of different ideas. You probably have great ideas, but sometimes we have to set our ideas aside and just listen to the teacher, listen to the coach, the mentor, the trainer, whatever. Do exactly as they say for a while until the time when we start to feel like, what if I try it a slightly different way? I know it works for them and I've done it and it also works for me, so that's great. But what's the next level? Then you can start being creative. And that's when things get really fun in the stage of mastery. The next quote, as years go by and we remain faithful to this process, yet another leap takes place to mastery. The keyboard is no longer something outside of us. It is internalized and becomes part of our nervous system, our fingertips. A really great example of this is when I was learning to read video sales letters. I was writing video sales letters, and I was starting to learn how to read the scripts. And it was amazing to me. I would write out these like really intellectual scripts. My copywriting was very like intellectual because I went to school and I was a major in history, so I got used to writing very like intellectual papers, and we got rewarded for sounding really smart basically and feeling really smart and writing that way. I got a sense of pride out of it, to be honest. However, once I got into the business world and the copywriting world, the marketing world, I had to unlearn all these things. I had to learn about the Flesch-Kincaid scale of readability, and I had to learn about how copywriting is very different than traditional academic writing, and that's what sells. So that process was very difficult for me, and I remember it was never more apparent than when I wrote video sales letters trying to impress a mentor of mine with the same skills, right, like academic writing. And then I sat down to read them, and literally my mouth could not even say the words. It was so hard to say the words because it was densely written that I just kept making mistakes with every single sentence. And that, number one, it made my copywriting much better because I had to go back and rewrite it in simpler ways. And that's one of the fastest ways to write better copy, by the way, is just to read it out loud. As soon as you read it out loud, you realize, oh man, that was a terribly worded sentence. I can cut that down a lot. But the other thing that this reminds me of is the fact that as I speak now, it's hard for me to remember, but when I sat down at a microphone to record, I couldn't really do it. I couldn't, if you were to find like earlier podcasts that I did by myself a few years ago, you'd see my growth in being able to speak on a microphone. It started out really choppy. I was very nervous just to talk to myself in a silent room. And then, like I said, it was very hard for me to say sentences, especially multiple sentences in a row. And then over time, as I kept reading the same script, the same line over and over, my mouth just eventually figured it out. I learned how to talk to a microphone, which was really strange. And then the other thing that I noticed is that without any sort of training or thinking or anything like that, my voice started to become more resonant, and I started to be able to enunciate on the fly as I was speaking. And again, I never trained in those things. It just happened naturally as I kept reading scripts over and over. And this is the part, there's a model out there, I don't know where it originally came from, but it's like the steps to learning a skill, which is unconscious incompetence. That's when you don't understand anything about it and you don't even know that you're bad. You don't know anything about it. Then there's conscious incompetence, speaking of enunciating, conscious incompetence, which means that you're bad. Going back to what we were talking about earlier, that's the stage where you can feel how wobbly your legs are. You can feel, I couldn't get past the fact that my mouth literally just couldn't say those words that on the script. I couldn't do it. It was like I was stuttering and faltering. So that's the conscious incompetence stage where you're aware of how bad you are. Then there's this conscious competence stage where you know that you're good, right? Like you start to see that I could see, like I said, my voice started to become more resonant. I was able to enunciate better. I could get through these scripts quicker. I could write better so that I could write and then know that without reading it out loud, I knew that I wouldn't be able to say those words very well later. So I would rewrite it before I ever even got to the mic. So that sped everything up and it all made me more and more efficient. But it wasn't really with me thinking. It wasn't like any specific technique or training. It's just like muscle memory. So conscious competence is when you start to feel, oh yeah, I'm starting to know how to do this. I'm starting to know how to navigate. And then there's conscious incompetence, which means after you start to get that baseline of competency, you start to realize, oh, there's more layers to this. There's more levels to this. And I can tell that I'm not as good as that person, or I'm not at that level yet. Oh, that would be interesting if I could do it that well, but I can tell that I'm not there. I also experienced this with guitar playing. I learned during the pandemic how to play guitar for the first time in my life. And I was very frustrated because intellectually I could go study and learn all these complex strategies and everything and all these concepts, but my fingers literally just couldn't play that fast. It was like I was trying to push forward intellectually in guitar lessons, but I couldn't do it. There was a bottleneck of my physical ability to communicate from my brain to my fingers and play those notes. And that just had to take the time that it had to take. And it was very frustrating for me because I feel like with other areas I can outpace that, but with guitar there was a physical limitation to how fast my fingers and my brain could figure it out. But over time it does become more and more unconscious competence, which is the last stage, meaning you don't even know that you're good anymore. You forget. You can track all this in neuroscience and everything too. Like the brain goes through this process of plasticity where it builds neuron connections to learn a skill. And at first it's like really hard, costs a lot of energy for the neurons to like connect with each other. But then eventually they start connecting and they build tighter and faster connections between each other. And it's really amazing. It's how our brains work, and it's incredible. And he talks about this in this book as well. But it's just a really beautiful part of the brain. And the last stage is unconscious competence, which again means that you don't even realize how good you are. This is guitar players who can play without thinking. What he's talking about here, that the keyboard, meaning like a piano, is no longer something outside of us. It is internalized, becomes part of our nervous system. This is where mastery starts to become apparent, where people aren't even thinking about it anymore. They're just playing or they're just doing. And lastly, again, it's that same concept that it's good to be reminded of many times. We have learned the rules so well that we can now be the ones to break or rewrite them. Again, it's back to that concept of the matrix. First, you have to learn how the matrix works. You learn, I think, there is no spoon, and then you can bend spoons, right? Those are the rules of the matrix. And life, business, all skills have similar rules. Once you learn the rules, then you can start to break them. Sports are really good for this too. Once you learn how to do the basics, then you can start to innovate and you can start to break them or rewrite them. So that was our first Mastery Monday. And so feel free to let me know in the comments what you thought, if you'd like to continue with this or try something different. And if you have any questions or comments about what we talked about today, just feel free to let me know. And thanks for watching.